Okay, so this session we're going to talk about another way in which climate change might increase costs. And in particular, we're going to talk about the threat to infrastructure. And by infrastructure, I mean things like roads, ports, power lines, through to factories and houses. So what will future climate? One aspect of climate change is that we're probably going to have more frequent and more severe adverse weather events. So these are things like heat waves. So instead of, say, New York having 8 days above 40 degrees centigrade, it may have 20 days above 40 degrees centigrade, and it may have some that'll go up to 45, make it really, really hot. Other places, we're going to get more rain. And in particular, we're going to get rain in more concentrated pores. So that's going to cause us floods. And large parts of the world already are subject to floods, and they can become more frequent and more severe. Of course, the other side of lots and lots of rain is lots and lots of periods with no rain. So these are droughts, and that adversely affects agriculture and the supply of water that you and I like to drink and swim in. It's also possible that some areas cyclones will be more frequent and of greater severity. And we all know what damage cyclones cause. And partly associated is with greater droughts and hotter periods, there's an expectation that some areas will experience more severe and more frequent bushfires. So these are the sort of first round or direct climatic effects. This also is an area in which we are still working out the details. More is known about climate in a sort of a global sense than is about climate in a regional sense. And the adverse effects of these severe events are really very local. And so there's still a lot of modelling and a lot of analysis before we really understand these in detail. But that will come. So what are the adverse effects of these weather events? Why do we worry about them? Well, first, sometimes people lose their lives. There's numerous people, heat waves, increases the death rate, bushfires, unfortunately some people die in those, as they do in floods, cyclones and so on. Disrupts production. So when roads are closed, power lines are down, or land is flooded, then production's held up for a few months, and you can't really recapture that. There's a loss and damage to roads, to ports, and the transport system. And we have to reinvest to return that to a workable state. And of course, there are spillover effects. When the electricity system breaks down, when telecommunications break down, even when our water supply breaks down, then that affects households, it affects businesses, and they just can't get on with business as normal. And that makes us cranky, but it often also adds to our costs. And of course, lots of buildings, both our own homes, factories owned by businesses, and government buildings can be affected by cyclones, by floods, and these sort of adverse events. So what are some of the additional economic costs of adverse weather events? Well, you've got to clean up for them. And so one only has to think of Cyclone Katrina, or the one that hit New York, the floods in Bangladesh, the floods that have hit Australia, and there's a lot of money and a lot of time spent in cleaning up the mess that's left and then rebuilding. We would recognise in due course that these adverse events are going to happen more often and more severe, and we wouldn't just build the same old road or the same old house that got washed away or blown away. We'd build more expensive but more robust buildings. So that means the cost of living in those particular areas has to increase. And that's part of the cost of climate change. We'd also want to invest more in early warning systems. So this is the Bureau of Meteorologies of the world giving us earlier warning and more precise warnings of just when the next flood's going to occur, where's the next cyclone going to go, how severe is it going to be, and what can we do to prepare for it. We'd also want our governments and community organisations to be well equipped for emergency services. And we're seeing some really interesting things happen in the world today. Emergency services are now almost becoming global. When something goes wrong in New Zealand, Australians send emergency people to help the Kiwis. Then when something goes wrong in Australia, the Kiwis reciprocate and send their people to help the Australians out. And lo and behold, Indonesia has a cyclone or some floods, and Australians and New Zealanders go and help the Indonesians out. So that's all part of the new system.